The Phillies were kind of in the middle. So we had a real battle internally in Major League Baseball about what to do about the fact that the Yankees had so much more money than anybody else. We came up with a revenue sharing plan. And about $300 or $400 million now is taken from the teams that have the most revenue. It goes into a pot and then it's distributed to the teams that don't have as much revenue. I'm very sorry, John. I'm not doing too well here with my cold. And there's a great battle over whether it's fair or not. As an example, the Pittsburgh Pirates and Florida Marlins, about 2 years ago, each got about $40 million that came from the Yankees, Mets, Red Sox, Phillies, the Angels, and the Dodgers. The problem is they just put that money in their pocket instead of spending it. The idea of revenue sharing is to give the teams money so they can sign players and draft players and compete. The idea of revenue sharing is to have equal competition. But some of the teams didn't look at it that way, and they put the money in the pocket. So there's a big debate going on now about forcing a major league team that gets revenue sharing to spend it on players, or at least on the player development system. And we have a labor agreement which comes to an end in December or something this coming year, but it doesn't look like we're going to have any problems. The union, which we've had battle with before, doesn't seem to be demanding too much, and I think we're going to have labor peace. The next evolution of revenue.
Bill, can I just interrupt you for 1 second? Just getting back to the revenue sharing for a second. Well, you know, there was the 2002 revenue sharing agreement, and then in 2006 with the next CBA, they tried to clean up some of the language to make sure that and some of the requirements to make sure the money was put back in the teams. That when Deadspin published those financial statements last year, it was pretty embarrassing to Pittsburgh and Florida in particular,
Right.
because it showed how much they were getting and how little they were paying for players. Their counter, of course, was, well, we're putting it into the minor league system, which is a little less measurable than major league salaries. But is this going to be an issue for this year's round of negotiations among the owners themselves? Not so much between the players and the owners, but are the owners in a position now to really agree? Because, of course, Hank Steinbrenner's come out and talked about communism, although he's a bit of a, mouthy guy.
Well, there are a lot of people that are paying money into the pot, like the Yankees, that feel that you should have a minimum payroll. In other words, sorry, there is a maximum. If you have over a $180 million payroll, you have to pay an extra tax. But there is no minimum. Theoretically, you could have a payroll of $20 million and just put the money in your pocket. But the owners that do give the money, like us, the Phillies, we gave $25 million into the pot last year. We would like to have a minimum payroll so that the smaller franchises like Kansas City, Florida, et cetera, would have to spend at least X, meaning maybe $60 million on player payroll, with the theory that that would make competition more equal.
Who's the biggest barrier to that, the other owners or the players? Because the players have always said, we don't want a salary floor because we think it's the slippery slope toward a salary cap, which of course they'll never accept.
That's right. The players do not want a minimum for that very reason. Yeah. So I don't think that's going to be part of the deal. The big deal that we want in the new labor agreement, when we draft a kid out of high school and college, some of the salaries we have to pay some of the top picks are really way too much. So we want to set a scale. First round draft pick gets $1 million, second round draft pick gets $500,000. That is our goal, to get that in the new labor agreement. I'm going to go for questions and answers now. I'm having trouble with my cold here. So you guys ask me some questions, if you will, please. Yes? No? No? No?
Well, here, I'll ask it. Go ahead, Dick, why don't you ask
I have to
questions?
say, you were talking about the labor agreement. Do you think there's any other potentially stumbling issues coming up this year?
I don't know of any. I think only the draft picks, and I don't think the union is gonna really be too worried about that, because it does not affect the active players that are in the game.
It was Michael Weiner who kind of said we don't see any major changes, some tweaks and things like that. He sounded pretty optimistic, at least.
We always used to try to fight for salary cap. Salary cap, they have one in football, they have kind of one in basketball. But whenever baseball has gone for a salary cap, we've always had a strike or a lockout or something, and I don't think the owners really want to go through that again, because baseball as an industry is at the highest level it's ever been. The attendance 2 years ago was the highest ever, and the last 2 years it was quite good. In this current year, I think we're going to be back probably the highest ever. So baseball is in good shape right now. Baseball is also making money. Until 2002, baseball as an industry was losing about $300 million a year. And I remember Peter Ueberroth, when he was commissioner, after about 6 months, he had all 26 owners, 26 at that time. And he said, I've been in this game 6 months, and I know what the problem is from an economic standpoint. If I give each of you guys a red button and a green button, and I say, you push that green button, you'll make $4 million, but you'll finish fourth. You push this red button, you'll lose $4 million, but you'll finish first. All of you will push the red button because the idea of most owners is to win. Why do people buy ball teams? Number one, for the competition, the fact that you compete 190 days a year. Number two, an ego trip. Let's face it, you get your name in the paper a lot, sometimes not so positive. And the other reason people buy teams is for the community. The owner of the Kansas City Royals, Ewing Kauffman, bought the Kansas City Royals in order to have a Major League Baseball team in Kansas City, which identifies the city as a Major League city for commerce and everything else. And he lost a lot of money, but he had a lot of money from his drug business, but he just wanted the town to have their own baseball team. Anybody?
Go ahead, Jim.
Bill, you hear from time to time about consolidation. Is the luxury payment keeping teams like Pittsburgh, Kansas City, San Diego from leaving the city? Because without that, they're just not viable teams, are they?
Well, yes, that's right. Without the revenue sharing, they wouldn't be able to operate. We have talked about contraction from time to time. Part of it, to be honest about it, was a ploy in order to get new ballparks built in the city that we talked about leaving, like Minnesota. We talked about leaving Minnesota, Tampa Bay, and Florida. But in reality, there's no place to go as far as moving. If you want to go from 30 down to 28 teams, possible, very unlikely now, because almost every city has a ballpark that generates enough revenue.
Tampa Bay doesn't, right?
Tampa Bay is
Just
a sad situation.
Yeah.
No matter, I mean, they've
Is that
had,
an owner problem, or is that a city?
well, the original owner was an idiot. His name was Vince Namoli, and he did if you ever took a PR course, he did everything exactly opposite of what you should do. He made more enemies in the city of the Tampa Bay area, and he screwed it up. But the new owners are pretty good, but I just don't think the stadium's in a bad location, for one thing, in Tampa Bay, in St. Pete. And my personal opinion is, having spent 7 weeks a year there in spring training, the fans in that area really care more about NASCAR and football than they do baseball. And I think Florida's a tough draw. I don't think the Miami team will do all that well with the new ballpark that they're going to open up next year. Also on the revenue side, the big thing now is all the electronic world. MLB.com, XM radio, your iPhone, your iPads, et cetera, et cetera. Baseball is taking in about $300 million a year from all these new electronic things that have come on board. And of course that helps the owners, but it also helps the players, because for every dollar we take in, we give the players at least $1 back. The rule of thumb on running a ball club is you should have a payroll of 50% of your total revenue. So our total revenue, say, is $270 this year, but our payroll is $160, so we're way over 50%. And if we don't get to the World Series, we're going to lose money this year. However, the last 4 or 5 years, we've made a pretty good piece of change, so things are not bad. I'm not crying.
Bill, there has been talk about adding another team, another wild card team, extending the playoffs. If that happens, there's obviously going to be a need to lengthen the season. We're already up against first and second week in November, depending upon weather. Starting in early April, late March, weather at both ends is bad, as certainly Philadelphia knows from 2008. What's going to happen with that, and is there any chance of changing the way the schedule breaks out for Major League Baseball?
Well, there's 2 or 3 things in baseball that are being talked about quite a bit. One is the designated hitter, and one is scheduling, and one is the postseason, whether we should have another wild card. I was the one that designed the way baseball is running now. I did the 3 divisions. I did the wild card. I did the interleague play, all of which I think has turned out well. But I am not in favor of adding another wild card team in the playoffs. But there is some sentiment for it. The designated hitter, we would have the designated hitter in the National League had my boss not gone fishing. And I'll tell you the story on that. Way back in about 1978, when the American League voted in the designated hitter, the Philadelphia Phillies had 2 players, Keith Moreland and Greg Luzinski, who were good hitters. And Paul Owens, our general manager, and Mr. Ruley Carpenter, the owner, sent me to the meeting where they were going to vote on the designated hitter. And they wanted to have the DH because of these 2 guys we had on our team. But when I went to the meeting, they said, well, the rule would not be in place until the year following this because the union has to approve it, and the union never approves anything we pass for at least a year. And I tried to get Mr. Carpenter to find out how he wanted me to vote. And he was out in the Atlantic Ocean fishing, so I couldn't talk to him. And so the vote came, and I abstained. You needed 6 votes to get the DH in the National League, and there was only 5 people that voted for it, and I abstained, which basically is a no vote. And the Pittsburgh Pirates general manager was told to vote the way the Phillies were going to vote because we were at that time battling the Pirates every year for first place. So he abstained. So the National League has never had the DH. And if Mr. Carpenter had not gone fishing, we might very well have the DH. Some questions, guys?
Go ahead, Dominic.
How do you feel about sports radio, particularly 610?
I have not listened to that goddamn radio. Boy, back in the 80s and 90s, they hammered me. Oh, man. And so I have a rule in my house: never dial in 610. I have literally not listened to that station in 15 or 20 years. And the only human being I've ever slugged was Howard Eskin. We had a charity function which my wife was very involved in, raising money for ALS. And Howard Eskin is a memorabilia guy, collects things and so forth. And he blasted the way we did the auction and criticized the wives. So I had a box there at the vet, and Howard was always at the games. And I said, Howard, come to my box for a minute. I said, have a seat. And I said, you're nothing but a no-good son of a bitch. And I went, that's the last time I've had any dealings with Howard Eskin.
Well,
But
now you know.
But he
Who was
didn't,
the
he
infielder?
didn't hit back, though.
Who was the infielder that they basically drove out of town? What was his name?
Juan Bell.
Oh, Juan Bell, yeah.
Anyway, funny things happen in baseball. In 1993, Phillies were in first place. We were in New York City, and we were about 5 games in front, and Jim Fergusi, our manager, thought that maybe the players would go out at night, and so he set a 1 o'clock curfew. And he sat in the lobby of the hotel with a roster checking off all the players when they came into their rooms. And I was with him. And so everybody was in, and we go up to the 5th floor where Fergusi and I each had our rooms. And coming out of one of the hotel rooms was our catcher, Darren Dalton. And he was all dressed up. And Dalton sees Fergusi out of the corner of his eyes. And Dalton immediately goes, Fergusi says, when you wake up, it'll cost you $500. Anyway.
What about signing Lenny Dykstra to a big contract?
I signed Lenny. He had a great year in '93. He was really the reason we got to the World Series, and everybody loved him. So over the winter, I signed him to a $27 million 4-year contract. And I go to spring training the next spring, and I eat at my favorite breakfast place, and Lenny is in there finishing up his breakfast, so I sat at a table near where he was. And as I went to pay my bill, the owner took my money, and of course, for whatever I was having, and he said, do you know who you sat next to for a minute? I said, no, who was that? He said, that's Lenny Dykstra, the center fielder. And I read in the paper the other day that some stupid jerk gave him 20